It is 1993 and Russia undergoes times of trouble. It is 1986 and Russia undergoes times of trouble. It is 1941 and Russia undergoes times of trouble. It is 1962 alternate history Russia, and it is more over than previously thought possible. HOI4 TNO immerses you, my dear viewer, in a modded, overhauled post-World War II mirror universe, where the Third Reich won the Second World War and cemented itself as a world power at the equal of the US of A, Japan, and Brazil. The USSR collapsed, but reconstituted itself into a West Russian state, powerful enough to enter into a third war against the Germans, which they lost once again, finally shattering Russia into a myriad of colorful and incredibly salient warlord states. However, despite previous assertions literally 12 seconds ago, it is in fact never over. As long as true Slav blood runs in the veins of the Russian folk, the fight is on. This video is not an ISP-ish playthrough nor a guide. This video is an audio-visual immersive yapfest of what restoring the glory of the Russian Empire feels like if you drink paint thinner, have TikTok-induced ADHD, and never interact socially with other human beings. In other words, we roleplay up in this suka. We know that the Blessed Regent Endures, and we give all of our glory to the eternal empire. In TNO, almost any of the aforementioned Russian warlord states can reunify Mother Russia, allowing for a veritable cornucopia of political systems, ideologies, and events available for you to shape the tomorrow of future Russia. Remains of the Soviet Red Army lingers, as do Russian Democrats, Russian ultra-nat revanchists, and Russian LARP'ers, who really pinky promise believe that they're actual, true, and honest Aryans because they truly wish it to be that way. Our story, that story being saving Russia from all these brainlets, begins in Komi, ostensibly a melting pot democracy, not unlike the United States of America, consisting of the entire broad spectrum from autocrat left to autocrat right, and then a little further right even, created by centrist, center-left, and current president Nikolai Voznesensky. This is by design. Komi was upon its creation declared a safe haven for all political ideologies, even the truly evil, degenerate ones who wants to raise my taxes, that I definitely pay every so often. This has, unsurprisingly, led to massive political instability, partisan paramilitaries, and poltards spamming soyjacks at their political enemies day and night. The early game of Komi is indeed political intrigue. The various notable politicians are introduced to the House of Cards with titles befitting their overall ideology: the Peacemaker, the Visionary, the Defender, the Organizer, the Aura Farmer, the Regent, Sergey Taboritsky. Sergey Taboritsky paused and shivered as a frigid draft swept over him, its bite sending chills through his old bones. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. The cold pressed in, piercing the immaculate old Tsarist uniform he wore. Its golden color felt like a manacle of frozen iron around his neck, and the fine silk lining did nothing to shield him from winter's bite. He grimaced, gritted his teeth, and opened his eyes, lifting his head to stare directly into the eyes of the Blessed Virgin. In response, he felt the flame of faith roar to life inside of him again, driving the cold from his body. He gasped at the sudden intensity of its heat, but stayed perfectly still. There was a presence behind him, a pair of reassuring hands on his shoulder, gentle whispers in his ears. Moisture gathered in his eyes, and he closed them again, recognizing the familiar sensation for what it was. Keep him safe, O Lord, he uttered, speaking directly to the presence. Watch over our blessed sovereign. Return the Tsarevich to us when the time comes. Give me the strength to carry out my sacred task, to defeat your enemies, to restore this land to what it should be. I beg you, stand with me, O Lord, and help me save Holy Russia. All of them, as you can see, equally sane, equally salient in their goals and visions for Komi and Russia at large, equally vying for power over the fledgling republic statelet as political violence, assassinations, and radical rhetoric becomes ever more rampant. This is the clash of shadows, manipulators, radicalists, and agitators, all using and abusing the open democratic system to pull, tear, and exploit the system for a purpose that is, in essence and upon reaching its goal, non-democratic. If you are a Redditor, and of course you are, you disgusting freak, you would call this the paradox of tolerance. Karl Popper's argument that the unconditional tolerance of intolerance will sooner or later lead to the tolerant system being seized and destroyed by the intolerant elements allowed by said system. If you are a non-Redditor, you would instead call this incontrovertible evidence that representative democracy is a scam, perpetuated by Hebrew thaumaturgy and increased lead traces in the groundwater. Just look at the state of Komi. We are surrounded by Bolsheviks, monarcho-fascists, Nazi collaborators, and worst of all, Turkish ethnics. Cross-border raids, poverty rates that would make even Africans blush, and massive deficits. And what does our elected political representatives actually do? Scheme, squabble, sabotage. I am not lying to you when I tell you that all the way up to the first Shmuta wars, every event concerns nothing but political infighting, political machinations, political chunya. The barbarians are at our gates, and democracy and so-called Russian democracy enjoyers can offer us nothing but talk, talk, and talk. The political pie chart of Komi is a disaster in a country that is about to undergo the second time of disasters. What exactly would be first and foremost on your mind? Healthcare, socialized pension plans, child labor laws, which shouldn't exist in a virtuous system in any case? No. Security, safety, not having a Ruhr-style glide bomb hit my potato field and my child tilling that potato field. That would be first and foremost on anyone's mind in times of trouble. So, as the 1963 elections rolls around, it should be no surprise that the right wing ascends in Komi, sweeping the National Assembly. And once the right wing is in place, the mandate of state security, of course, must be followed. What does this mean, practically? Well, remember when we spoke of the tolerance paradox, that unlimited tolerance leads to violent, intolerant ends. Popper's theory was that as long as intolerance can be met in the marketplace of free ideas, as long as quote-unquote intolerant groups can be rationally debated, they should not be suppressed. Interesting theory, Herr Popper. Unfortunately for you, you are Austrian, therefore basically German, therefore basically wrong in every single philosophical aspect of your being. Allow me to posit an alternative. How about instead, I suppress every single political opinion, ideology, and point of view that I don't particularly like. That means hunting down and imprisoning every single member of the opposition party and throwing them into jail for being agitated enemies of the state. Doesn't that sound swell? No? Too bad, you Judeo-Bolshevik lipcock. Face the wall. Now that our new state is safe and secure, if you ignore the fact that every single person is my enemy, it is high time to leave the enemies within rotting in cells and face the enemies without head on. And how to face these enemies, how to conquer and reconquer our stolen balkanized lands. Essays? Good vibes? No. Child soldiers. Enter Sergey Taboritsky, the Regent, single-minded in his goal of finding Alexei Romanov, the son of the last Tsar Nicholas II and the last Tsarevich of Russia, presumed wrongfully murdered by Bolshevik forces during the Russian Civil War following the October Revolution, to ascend him to the throne of a new Russian empire. To that goal, Taboritsky has conveniently trained and recruited from church-sponsored desert orphanages, a disciplined and hardened force of loyalist paramilitaries, the Taboritsky. Taboritsky truly has touched these kids, and he made them hard as well. Loyalist and unquestioning of his word, fiercely devoted to the same particular branch of Christianity that Taboritsky preaches, the injustice of forgiveness. The sermon today was on a topic that Taboritsky found himself irritated by, and a regular point of contention with the priests, that of forgiveness. The virtue of looking upon the most vile, the most evil, and forgiving him. He simply did not understand such a thing, and certainly could not believe that God would support such injustice. No, when he heard the preaching of forgiveness, he was reminded of the slain Romanovs, butchered by the godless communists like so many other devout Russians. His blood boiled and his face darkened as the priest continued his sermon, yet he did not speak. He only listened. Even men of God could be incorrect sometimes, but this man was ultimately irrelevant. Such a man could not restore the godly fervor that Russia desperately needed, but fortunately, that time was coming. Sure, old Sergey's goal of finding the lost Tsarevich Alexei to reinstitute monarchy is a little out there, as is the old man himself, but Taboritsky has seen the skein of fate, that Alexei lives, and that he will be the messiah that saves Russia. And he has a point with Russian tradition. The monarchy as an institution has endured for several centuries in this Russia, from the Tsardom of Ivan the Terrible through the empire and into several of the warlord states claiming to be the direct continuation of the empire. The Republic of Komi failed to offer security and prosperity. The communists of the Soviet Union and Bukharin failed to offer revolutionary victory, yet absolute monarchy under God endured as an institution, as a legitimate idea, as the panacea for the Russian soul. It is therefore a foregone conclusion, of course, that Viktor Larionov, a Taboritsky loyalist, is put in charge as Minister of Defense as we embark upon the first of many reunification wars. And with the power of the Taboritsky, the divine mandate of the Orthodox God, and playing on the easiest difficulty, West Russian state after state is subdued and conquered. It is only fitting, then, that this new West Russian state should have itself a new constitution. Unfortunately, for anyone hoping for a constitutional conservative democracy, aka traitorous agitators, the Constitutional Committee for the Provisional Government is stacked by monarchists and Taboritsky loyalists. The price you pay for victory. As such, our new constitution is not so much a structure of power balance, legal standards and protection of rights, but a piece of paper for our Tsar that says, I can do what I want. Absolute monarchy has returned to Russia. Taboritsky seizes the National Assembly, and with that, one diktat, one sacred objective. Find Tsarevich Alexei Romanov wherever he is, no matter the cost, absent forgiveness for any and every enemy who would deny us, by divine right, faithful and bearing true allegiance to Tsarevich Alexei. God save the Blessed Regent, and the clock starts ticking. The clouds of unrepentant reaction are gathering in the vastness of West Russia as the monarchist forces of Ust-Tsok defeat their last rival in the region for the sovereignty over the Russians. Headed by the self-proclaimed regent of the Russian Empire, a former Nazi collaborationist and monarchist exile, Sergey Taboritsky, the Regency of West Russia dedicated its efforts to the purification of the last strains of the Bolshevik plague and has been making preparations for the return of Tsarevich Alexei, who allegedly survived the Bolshevik massacre in 1918 to take his rightful place on the Russian throne. As the fancied regent continues to impose the old imperial customs with a remarkable brutality, the neighbors of Taboritsky's domain, astonished by his zealous fervor, are starting to wonder whether if he can appeal to something more than the legitimacy of the Tsarevich, who has been dead for several decades. decades. Lies. Loyal subjects of the Regency know that Alexei lives. Loyal subjects of the Regency sleep soundly under the state-mandated portrait of Sergey Taboritsky's steely gaze. That being said, our Regency is secured only by two things: the application of chemical weapons on disloyal elements of the population, and the vow that Tsarevich Alexei yet lives, and that he will ascend to the throne of the eternal empire in due time. The clock is ticking, literally, to accomplish this goal within a not too distant time frame. Do not let the clock strike midnight. Every day that passes where Alexei does not sit on the throne is another day where the clock ticks further towards midnight, which is another day our blessed Regent Taboritsky is forced to gas more Russians. As mentioned earlier, Taboritsky is a former Nazi regime collaborator and has adopted the ways of the Third Reich. You thought maybe we were getting an absolute benevolent monarchy? Too bad, chump. We are Natsocks now, and with common Natsockery comes the aspect of absolute purity. Alexei is here, somewhere in Russia, hidden away or kept safe by divine providence from the corruption of earthly Russia. That much is certain, but his exact whereabouts are veiled, his location shrouded. No amount of prayer will bring Mother Russia to her necessary deliverance from evil. No, necessary evil must be delivered to Mother Russia to ensure her deliverance. Every Talmudic agitator, every Bolshevik element, every impure savage is another Paul between the blessed regent's sight and the Tsarevich position. Our blessed Tsarevich will not return to us until we have proven ourselves worthy of his return. How to prove ourselves worthy? Bullets, gas, forced labor. Bullets, gas, forced labor. Secret police death lists a la Gestapo and the NKVD. Yes. Killing impure children for being born with 3 extra toes. More. Pol Pot maxing on teachers, academics and scholars. I know I shouldn't, but I will. Every minority a target, every citizen a serf. Bashkirs, Tatars, the numerous ethnic groups of Russia we work to death in our coal mines. Our own soldiers we liquidate systematically to reach arbitrary fulfillment numbers. And children that ask too many dumb questions like, why do we kill people when the Bible says it's wrong to kill? Well, spare the rod, spoil the child. Understand, the Regency is in a philosophical sense not a country, not a state, not a nation. This is a cult. This is an entity that looks at the Nazi regime and says, sure, all those tanks, dive bombers and fancy uniforms enacting aggressive wars of expansion and ethnic cleansings, they are all well and good, but have you considered applying generous amounts of phosgene gas as well? In the eyes of the regent, there are no material boundaries, no ordinances of man that cannot be crossed in the service of Holy Russia and her Tsarevich Eternal. In between these incredible evidence-based policies, we are privy to Regent Taboritsky's journal. 1 entry for every strike of the clock towards midnight. These entries are our gateway into the mind of Sergey Taboritsky. Often warnings of his next set of despotic policies, his musings at the time, and just how close to crashing out he is getting. They start off well written, long form, unbroken prose with accurate historical references. You might not agree with his assertions, which I'll have you shot for of course, but you can't deny their presentation and flair. That is at least until the Regency conquers West Siberia and the chemical weapons stock truly moons. As above, so below. To mirror the perfection necessary for Alexei's return, it is a grim necessity, because heaven is already perfectly pure. Alexei cannot or will not descend into a world that is stained by Bolshevism or Judaism. To bridge the gap between the two realms and force the Messiah to return, Taboritsky knows he must make the below a perfect mirror image of the above. If heaven is pure and devoid of sinners and subhumans, lands, then Russia must be violently stripped of them too. By declaring, "I will be our Joshua," Taboritsky assigns himself the role of God's holy commander on earth, the below. And like Joshua, who had to rid Canaan of the defilement of pagan idolatry before God's physical presence could permanently dwell there, Taboritsky believes that once the last Canaanite is destroyed and Russia brought to absolute purity, God will be satisfied. The land will be as above and fit for a holy Tsar. Thus, Alexei will return to claim his throne. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Terrifying reports are emerging from West Siberia as the armies of the Blessed Regent Sergey Taboritsky have fought their way through the Urals and onto the Siberian plateau, now holding the largest industrial output among all the remaining contenders for Russian reunification. Everything from chemical and biological weapons to salting the earth has been employed in this crusade, with Taboritsky claiming that the means for Alexei's return must not follow international law, as only the regent's word is final. The search for the long-dead heir to the Romanov throne continues, as the newly proclaimed Holy Russian Empire prepares to press its march eastward by any means necessary. The world watches anxiously, wondering what the next step in the Mad Regent's plans to purify Russia will be, and how much more suffering it will bring to the average Russian. It is no wonder that sooner rather than later, the policies of the end justifying any and every mean would put Taboritsky and his vision at odds with the priests and the clerical class of Holy Russia. While Taboritsky was appointed regent in a religious ceremony and referred to Russia's fall from grace as a result of turning away from holiness, the clergy aren't exactly too infused with his overall policy agenda of gassing every single Kazakh. He knew that they still thought themselves above him. The arrogance of priests was boundless and their propensity for betrayal well known. He shivered at the thought. He had to remain loyal to his faith, but what of the Orthodox Church? They were still just men and didn't understand God like he did. For them, religion was all rules and ritual. Taboritsky knew that faith had to be followed with action. No amount of prayer would ever save Russia. God would surely favor him, but only if he first proved himself worthy by great deeds. For great rulers like Taboritsky, who indeed possess the mandate of heaven, as proven by martial success, the supposed superiority of faith and spirituality as gatekept by the clergy is in fact anathema to true tradition, and a relatively modern heretical invention of a power-perverted church structure. In the times of Charlemagne, the priests understood the sovereign as an image of God on earth, and whose total authority on matters of wisdom was attributed to said sovereign, Rex et sacerdos, king and priest. Obeying the sovereign was a religious duty, and rebelling against him was a sin against God, because the sovereign was God's very manifestation walking among us. Allow me to read a passage from Evola's Revolt Against the Modern World. When the priestly class, however, by virtue of the consecration that it administers, demands that the regal authority should recognize the hierarchical superiority of the priesthood and be subjected to it, such was, in Europe, the church's claim during the struggle for investitures. This amounts to a full-blown heresy, totally subversive of traditional truths. Taboritsky is correct. How can God save Holy Russia when the so-called holy men of Russia are subversive of the very divine authority of her ruler? Burn the priests. Burn the heretics. But what about due process? Due process is for just societies, and Holy Russia is not just, for how could it be? In every nook, in every cranny, a traitor waits to stab the Blessed Regent in his most holy back. Theft, death penalty. Deviancy, death penalty. Abandoning your mega campaign, 3 generations of death penalty. So it was that the questions began. Worrying, treasonous questions. And the sentence for treason? Death. The bodies continued to pile up. More mass graves were dug, and the regent's fury was unending. No excuses. Not for soldiers, not for priests, not for vagrants. Can't read? Too bad, so sad. Get filtered. Unfortunately, much like presidential terms in the White House ages a person, Regency in Holy Russia takes its toll. For every strike of the clock towards midnight, Taboritsky's journals become more frazzled, less legible. Several times he writes about foregoing sleep, and now visions from the Almighty himself. Latin letters, IHSV. The letters. What do they mean? I hate synagogues, verily? Is Hebrew spies visiting? In hoc signo vinces. In this sign thou shalt conquer, and the Russian Far East awaits. Taboritsky sat upon his throne for the first time in months. Fingers steepled and legs crossed, he stared out into the empty throne room before him. It was the middle of the day, and yet nobody came to the regent's palace anymore unless they had to. That struck him as curious. Where were the petitioners and the mothers asking him to bless their children? Where were the generals kneeling before him with news of great conquests? Where was his trusted spy master with the news of Tsarevich Alexei's whereabouts? More than the physical isolation, Taboritsky also had a gut feeling that something was wrong with the throne room. He had first sensed it months ago, and it had kept him confined to his study ever since, but today he had to know if it was real, if his mind was just playing tricks on him. And indeed, there it was. Loneliness. Not the absence of people, but of God. In that throne room with its golden throne and gilded mosaic-covered ceiling, God seemed curiously absent. Goosebumps ran up Taboritsky's spine as he contemplated the thought. It wasn't possible. All he had done for God, Russia, and the Tsarevich. He couldn't be alone. He couldn't have made a mistake. The regent leapt from his throne, suddenly disturbed and trembling. Abject terror filled his body and turned his blood to ice, but he hadn't any idea why. Striding from the throne room and back into his study, he slumped down in front of the hearth, gazing into the flames. And a spark of doubt flickered in his soul. From here on out, every journal entry, every strike of the clock, Taboritsky becomes more and more disjointed in his writing. Generally speaking, when you have to reassure yourself that you aren't insane, quoting verses about the end times seem ill-advised. For a long while now, every single focus choice available to you confers only negative economic and civilian bonuses. There are no more improvements to be made on Holy Russia, for Holy Russia deserves no improvements. If Alexei has not yet made his presence known, if God has not made Alexei's presence known, it is because Russia and the Russians are unworthy. And if Russia is unworthy, it is because Russia has not been purified sufficiently. Everything in the Regency is poised to collapse. Every idea, every choice, nothing improves and everything gets worse. Test subjects aged 15 to 30 are experimented on with chemical agents as levels of purity previously thought unimaginable are reached by means previously thought beyond comprehension. It is safe to assume that unless you are a minority group lucky enough to have escaped to Nazi Germany, you are already dead. And with the last of Russia conquered and the Far East and unwashed savages under new and very educational management, all will be worth it. All must be worth it when the Tsarevich sits on his holy throne, ruling his eternal empire, created in his very image as God's king and priest in all perpetuity. He is here. He does not speak. Alexei lives. Right? Ink spurted and splattered across the page as Taboritsky scrawled away. His hands trembled as though afflicted with a palsy. Sweat ran down his face in streams, darkening the blood-crusted and ink-stained paper. His eyes were bloodshot and weepy. He had not slept in days. He no longer sat at his desk. It was too near the window where God could peer down from the heavens to look upon him with shame. Instead, he was curled up in a corner, back aching, feverishly scribbling. He stared straight ahead, hands moving on their own. He hadn't written anything resembling a word in a week. There was a sound, a scuffling of boots on marble. The regent glanced up and he felt his heart freeze. His pen clattered to the floor. He tried to stand, but his legs were like lead, and he stumbled to his knees. As he dragged himself forwards, he felt the strength begin to drain from his arms. A pounding began to thrum in his head, a pain like no other. But he pressed forth, for how could any man not be enraptured in the presence of his Tsar? His dark hair was cropped short beneath the golden crown. He wore a cape of ermine and was bedecked in gold and jewels. He looked older than the regent had expected, but shone with the lights of heaven, an immortal sovereign for the Holy Russian Empire. Taboritsky opened his mouth to speak, to question, to marvel. But the words would not come to him. The divine grace of his monarch was overpowering, paralyzing his entire body. Every muscle had turned to stone. He blinked. He blinked and finally uttered a scream. Bones, a small skull with a bullet hole in it, scraps of fine royal clothing stained with old blood were laid over them. The scream turned to a choking gurgle as the pain exploded inside his head, blacking out his senses. He collapsed, staring in horror into the darkness around him. And Sergey Taboritsky, blessed regent of Holy Russia, breathed his last. Upon realizing that everything he had done was for nothing, that all the horrific purges, chemical bombings, and totalitarian controls failed to bring back Alexei, that the Tsarevich was dead more than 5 decades, and that Taboritsky achieved the exact opposite of his goal by trying to bring a fictional heaven and messiah to earth, he transforms the below, Russia, into a literal, ash-choked hell. Blessed Regent Sergey Taboritsky realizes the truth and suffers a fatal stroke. He was not vaxxed. As such, weeks pass with the status quo maintained for no other reason than cult members knowing no better than their arbitrary, pointless orders. The lieutenant looked down at the list. Every location on it had been pacified. There was no work left to do. He felt the eyes of his men upon him, asking a question only he could answer. He looked up, searching for a solution. His eyes fell on a dirt road leading into the forest. 30 minutes later, the platoon was marching down the road, knowing not where they were headed, only that their mission was not over. The soldiers marched until they couldn't any longer. Then they would rest for a few hours and continue. Whenever they came to a settlement, they would carry out their orders. There was no established rule, but they always took about half of the population. Sometimes that meant 1, sometimes it meant 20. One Red Day, it had meant 150. Some soldiers deserted, but most were too afraid. As long as they followed orders, they could cling to their wretched lives a little longer. So they marched and they killed. Mustard gas shells are delivered by logistics officers to battalions not in need, with no orders to follow and no enemies to fight. All the while, more and more of the Regency's zones go dark, their administrators suspending communications for one reason or another, as Larionov attempts to seize control of the collapsing empire for his own. A futile effort. Larionov does not have the mandate of heaven, and one after another, after another, after another, after another, does the Holy Russian Empire crumble into multiple smaller warlord states yet again. From dust did she come, and to dust shall she return. Maybe forever. The chemical salvation that Taboritsky offered has left the Russian soil, once fertile with fields of wheat and mail-order brides, salted, despoiled, now a barren wasteland maybe forever. But even if a strong hand should reforge her, the lands will forever remain scarred. Balkanized and with a large portions of her lands forever in hospital, it is safe to say that the HRE policies have led not only to millions, if not tens of millions of deaths, as is reported in-game by Richard Pipes. Taboritsky's reign of terror and ethnic cleansing campaigns were fiercely opposed by dozens of partisan groups, some of which continue to operate even now. To combat these rebels, the Holy Russian Empire embarked on a suicidal campaign of mass gas deployment and environmental destruction within its own borders, seeking to deny the underground organizations anywhere to hide in Russia's vast landscape. The empty lands are the inevitable result of this policy. In Russia's current state, conducting underground research is an impossibility, but aerial surveillance has recorded over 10,000 examples of newly lifeless regions since 1969. The vast majority of these are less than 10 square kilometers, but the largest examples can cover thousands, representing entire dead ecosystems. Early studies estimate that 0.4% of Russia's land area is now uninhabitable for at least the next 2 to 3 decades, and over 10% has been contaminated to varying degrees. Somewhere in heaven, aka the Fire Rises mod Discord, Austrian map painter Gunter Fehlinger smiles. But at least the Americans sent over some more guns. Anyway, good riddance and quite frankly, skill issue. Now, this is one of my favorite playthroughs in one of my favorite mods from one of my favorite games. In fact, the old funny Clockman memes and Dengish Spear Save Europe propaganda was what initially got me to play TNO. How this playthrough changes from reading about campaign managers into actual horror stories is undeniably keynote. There is so much more to this playthrough, but you would need a 3-hour video to cover everything. From the early game political machinations, to the stories about daily life in the Regency, to the warlord states that come after its collapse. Look, Alexei even returned. Kind of. Slightly more Polish. Anyway, if you watched this far, thank you very much. And a special thank you to 2 people. First, my member, not members, but my one channel member keeping the lights on in the HOI4 Video Factory compound. My name Jeff, unless you're Japanese, in which case, Minami Jeff-chan. There are no benefits of being a member yet, so your poor money management skills are greatly appreciated. Secondly, thank you to Lavader for shouting out my now twice deleted Poland tribute video. I had a bunch of comments, now gone, who said they came from his channel, so I greatly appreciate it. War Funny's video will be back up in October when the strike runs out. Anyway, stay tuned for more videos to come by subscribing, HOI4 or otherwise. Like for the algo, comment for my eyes to see, and check out my other cromulent videos like this very salient Hyperborean playthrough. I promise you, Anon, this video will help you save Europe. Stay frosty.